He mocked the wrong man, and the whole building saw it. Richard Collins, a high-ranking board member, thought a quiet black man in the elevator didn't belong. He laughed. He belittled. He made sure everyone else stayed silent too. But he didn't know the man beside him wasn't lost. He didn't know Leonard Hart was the CEO of a $2,100,000,000 zero-cents firm and about to become his company's largest stakeholder. They tried to ignore him. Then they tried to block him. But what they couldn't stop was the truth. Because when justice doesn't knock, it walks in and takes a seat. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you're watching from and make sure to subscribe, because the story you're about to hear isn't just about one man. It's about all of us. Sunlight poured through the lobby windows that morning, catching on polished glass and steel. The building buzzed like usual, but near the executive elevator, one man stood still, silent, waiting, and carrying the kind of power that doesn't shout. And that was the day everything began to change. The elevator doors slid open with a gentle chime. It was early morning, still quiet, the building not yet pulsing with the full rhythm of a corporate day. Into the mirror-lined box stepped Leonard Hart, tall, composed, dressed in a charcoal gray suit that whispered of fine tailoring and old restraint. He pressed no button. He simply stood, waiting. Seconds later, the space filled with footsteps and chatter. A group of executives entered, laughing too loudly. Among them was Richard Collins, a board member with silver temples, a tailored navy blazer, and the smirk of a man who'd never been denied a room. Richard barely glanced at Leonard. Then, catching sight of his skin tone and lack of ID badge, he let out a scoff. "You must have taken a wrong turn out of the janitor's closet," he said, chuckling toward his assistant, who offered a nervous, echoing laugh. No one corrected him, not the intern, not the senior consultant, not the man with the leather folio who had once shaken hands with senators. Silence filled the tight space, thick and complicit. Leonard said nothing. His eyes stayed forward, steady, his breath even. His silence was not weakness, it was a shield, but to Richard that silence was defiance. The elevator climbed, but time seemed to slow. The air turned dense. Richard cleared his throat again, more aggressively this time, as if daring Leonard to respond. "Executive floors for executives," he added, voice dripping with casual condescension. Still nothing from Leonard, not a glance, not a twitch. Have you ever watched a man try so hard to provoke someone just to feel bigger? Moments like these are small in passing, but enormous in meaning. That elevator, enclosed in steel and glass, became a mirror for every assumption, every quiet prejudice, every power game disguised as a joke. And the real question is, when you witness something like this, do you speak or do you stay silent? The elevator continued upward, but it wasn't the floors rising. It was the story just beginning its climb. When the elevator reached the top floor, Richard stepped out with his usual swagger, nodding briskly to the receptionist, unaware of the flicker of confusion in her eyes. Behind him, Leonard remained inside, still and silent, as the door slowly slid shut. Moments later, that same receptionist screen blinked red, a calendar alert flashing. 8:45, I.M. Masa. High-value guest arrival. Her eyes widened, darting briefly toward the now closed elevator. She knew who that was, but Richard did not. He walked the gleaming corridor toward the boardroom, thumbing through a half-written email proposing tighter lobby access. "Status must remain visible," he typed, unaware of just how ironic those words were becoming by the second. Inside the boardroom, executives milled about, coffee in hand, exchanging the same recycled greetings of power and politics. Richard basked in the comfort of legacy, surrounded by men who looked like him and had risen like him, on familiarity, not merit. That's when he saw the man again. Leonard Hart, the man from the elevator, now stood in quiet conversation near the front row, unbothered, unescorted, invited. His posture didn't ask for permission. It asserted belonging. No badge, no announcement, just presence. Real, grounded, undeniable. Richard's feet stalled. His mind raced. How did he get here? Who let him in? A nervous laugh escaped Richard as he leaned toward another board member. Didn't expect him to make it past security. But this time, no one laughed. The room, once buzzing with certainty, began to shift. Something was off. Then the keynote began. The stage lit up. A polished video rolled across the screen, introducing a strategic partner for the firm's new infrastructure expansion. The screen lit up with a name: Leonard Hart, founder and CEO, Meridian Equity Group. A $2,100,000,000 0-cent titan. Gasps spread like a ripple across the room. Richard's smirk died slowly, like a candle in wind. How do you react when the person you mocked turns out to hold the future in his hands? Sometimes, the real power doesn't enter with noise. It arrives with poise. And when it finally speaks, silence has no place to hide. Richard Collins didn't sleep well that night. Long after the boardroom had cleared and the polite applause faded, he sat in his office, staring at Leonard Hart's name on a glowing press release. Meridian Equity Group, strategic partner, majority stakeholder. The words stung, though no one had said them aloud. The man he'd belittled had quietly walked into the heart of Richard's empire, and now he had a voice in shaping it. Though Richard did what men like him had always done when their power felt threatened. He masked fear with formality. At dawn, he sent out a memo to his executive team under the subject line, Visitor Protocol Reinforcement. The message was laced with coded language: preserving professional atmospheres, executive identity standards, unescorted access concerns. No names, no outright accusations, but everyone knew who it was about. And just like that, the trap was laid. The following morning, Leonard arrived on schedule, greeted no one, and moved with his usual calm. But this time, the front desk didn't smile. A clerk quietly picked up the phone. Moments later, 2 security guards approached. "We're sorry, sir," one said, careful to keep his tone even. "Your clearance hasn't been verified. We'll need you to wait." Leonard looked at the glass wall between the lobby and the executive elevators. Then he nodded. "Of course." He stood, just stood. 30 minutes passed. No seat, no explanation. People glanced, whispered, hurried away. Some recognized him from the keynote. No one spoke. But Leonard never flinched. He checked his watch, shifted his weight, waited. And in that stillness, something powerful happened. The cruelty wasn't in the words. It was in the silence. But the dignity? That lived in how he carried it. Have you ever seen someone hold their head high while being quietly shut out? Sometimes, grace is the loudest answer, and in Leonard's stillness, the entire building heard it. The memo was meant to stay internal. Richard Collins had sent it with the careful precision of a man who had long played corporate chess. He'd titled it, Cultural Alignment Standards, dressing bias in the language of branding. Words like presentation, environment, and perception floated between the lines, cold and deliberate. It didn't name Leonard, but the subtext was unmistakable. Then came the mistake. A junior assistant, rushing to forward venue access for an upcoming investor mixer, attached the wrong document. Within hours, the memo, veiled prejudice and all, circulated beyond the walls of the company. Consultants saw it. Partners whispered. A fire had started, quiet but hot. By the time Richard entered the networking lounge that Thursday evening, the damage had already begun to show. He walked in, as always, with shoulders square, chin lifted. The jazz band played soft behind a wall of tailored suits and clinking glasses. But the greetings came slower, the smiles tighter. Some didn't make eye contact at all. Whispers floated like dust. One woman from legal passed Richard's raised glass without a word. At the bar, a rising associate muttered, "He's the one who sent it, right?" Richard pretended not to hear. Then he saw him. Leonard Hart had arrived. Not announced, not escorted, but invited by one of the external partners. No spotlight, just presence. And somehow, that quiet presence reshaped the room. People gravitated toward him, asking real questions, listening with real interest. Richard watched from across the floor, suddenly aware that the gravity of the room no longer pulled toward him. Have you ever felt a crowd turn away without ever raising their voice? Sometimes the loudest fall begins in silence, and as Richard stood there with his untouched drink and practiced smile, he finally understood. Respect can't be demanded, it must be earned. And his? Was slipping, one quiet gesture at a time. The quarterly Innovation Summit buzzed with anticipation. Banners lined the conference wing, building the future together, and corporate leaders mingled with press and policymakers. Richard Collins, ever the front row man, arrived early, dressed in his signature blue pinstripe suit, the knot in his tight controlled. He smiled for photos, shook hands with familiar power, and posed beside slogans he no longer believed. But his focus was singular, Malcolm Hart's keynote. Yes, that Malcolm. Calm in the elevator, poised in the boardroom, unshaken in the lobby, and now scheduled to speak on inclusion through infrastructure, a topic Richard found both irritating and dangerous. When the host took the stage to introduce Malcolm, the lights dimmed. As applause rose, Richard made his move. He stood up, slow and deliberate, adjusting his lapel like nothing was wrong. Then, without a glance back, he walked up the center aisle toward the exit. A silent protest. Heads turned, a few gasped. The host faltered mid-sentence, but Malcolm didn't flinch. He simply adjusted the mic and began speaking, his voice low and steady. Leadership, he said, is not what you look like in a suit, or how many rooms you can enter unchallenged. It's how many doors you leave open behind you. The room was still, leaning in. Data came next. Charts, case studies, real numbers. But beneath it pulsed something deeper. A reckoning. A truth long ignored. Then came the video. No intro, just sound. Richard's own voice echoed through the speakers. The elevator joke, the front row comment, the memo read aloud. The audience stiffened. Murmurs rose like static. Malcolm stood tall. He didn't explain. He didn't accuse. He simply said, "Accountability is not punishment, it's clarity. Have you ever heard your own words played back and wished you could outrun them? Some truths don't shout, they reflect." And in that moment, Richard didn't lose the room because of what Malcolm said. He lost it because everyone finally heard what he himself had always said, too loudly, for too long. 3 weeks after the summit, Richard Collins walked through the doors of a vocational training center in South Bronx. No press, no staff waiting, just a squeaky hinge, the smell of sawdust, and the low hum of young voices trying to build something real. He wore jeans now. The expensive watch was gone. The once firm shoulders slouched slightly, but not in defeat, more like surrender, not to others, but to the truth he had refused for too long. No one recognized him, and that was a mercy. He started with menial tasks, organizing cables, replacing light bulbs, sweeping dust from corners. There were no boardroom chairs here, no lobbies to control. Only work, honest, invisible work. And for the first time in years, Richard didn't feel the need to be seen. Weeks passed. He helped a teen fix a busted laptop, rewired a training station. One afternoon, a young woman asked him to proofread her resume. She squinted at him and said, "What did you used to do, mister?" Richard hesitated, then replied, "I made decisions that didn't always deserve the power I had." She nodded. Not with awe, just understanding. That moment hit harder than applause ever had. Later, the center's director invited him to share his story. Just 12 chairs, a whiteboard, and kids with tired eyes and bright minds. Richard almost declined. But then he stood, cleared his throat, and said quietly, "I thought silence made me strong." It didn't. He didn't name Malcolm Hart. He didn't have to. Every sense bowed in that direction, toward reckoning. "Everything I lost," he continued, "was exactly what I needed to start becoming someone worth trusting." Have you ever had to lose your title just to find your name? That room didn't clap. They didn't need to. They listened. And for Richard, that was more than enough. Because real change doesn't start with a speech. It starts with showing up. Every day, humble and uninvited. The months rolled on. Richard Collins never returned to the Skyline boardrooms. He didn't try to reclaim his place at the top. He no longer sent emails that shaped policy, nor did he walk into a room expecting people to rise. Instead, he walked into the vocational center every morning just before 8, coffee in hand, sleeves rolled, ready to repair what could be fixed and accept what couldn't. His name had once opened doors. Now it barely raised eyebrows. He never corrected the young man who called him Mr. Rick, nor the woman who always forgot his last name. That anonymity was its own kind of healing. Malcolm Hart never reached out. He didn't need to. The story had moved beyond confrontation. Redemption had never been the goal. Relevance was no longer the prize. One foggy morning, as Richard organized a shipment of refurbished laptops, he paused by the cracked window overlooking the street. He watched a boy in a hoodie explain code logic to another student, gesturing with the same conviction Richard once used to close million-dollar deals. Except this moment didn't need a closing. It needed care. That's when it struck him. All those years he had measured success in applause, in power, in whose voice got to speak. But now, here in a place with no podiums, he had learned the value of being present without being praised. What if legacy isn't what they write about you, but how they feel when you leave the room? He didn't need a new title. He needed to keep showing up, with humility, with intent, with no audience. And slowly, in those quiet days of teaching others how to be seen, Richard Collins finally learned how to disappear without losing himself. The kind of redemption that doesn't erase the past, but grows something better from it. That's the kind of legacy worth leaving behind. The heart of this story reminds us of a simple truth. Dignity doesn't need to raise its voice to be heard. In a world where power often shows itself through titles, wealth, or who speaks the loudest, Leonard Hart showed us something far more enduring, the quiet strength of character. He didn't fight insult with anger. He didn't need revenge to be seen. Instead, he stood tall, moved with grace, and let his actions speak louder than any accusation. And perhaps that's a lesson we can all carry, no matter our age. There will always be moments when people misjudge us, overlook us, or try to shrink our worth. But how we carry ourselves in those moments says more than anything they might say. Kindness, patience, and integrity still matter, and they leave a deeper mark than power ever could. So if you've ever been dismissed, ignored, or doubted, remember, your presence matters. Sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is stand our ground quietly and keep showing up with dignity. That, in the end, is what truly changes the room. Leonard Hart never needed applause. His strength lived in the stillness, in waiting quietly while others doubted him, in walking forward without demanding to be followed. That's quiet power, the kind that doesn't rise to provoke, but endures to outlast. And in the weeks that followed, something shifted, not just in offices and boardrooms, but in hearts. Policies changed, conversations deepened, eyes once quick to judge now paused, not out of fear but reflection. Justice wasn't loud. It came in the form of presence reclaimed, respect re-earned, and a silence finally filled with truth. This wasn't just about one man's rise. It was about what happens when dignity refuses to bow, and others begin to see their own reflection in that calm, unwavering stand. If this story stayed with you, share it. Subscribe to Echoes of Racism so these voices don't fade into silence. In the meantime, I've chosen 2 stories I think will move you just as much. Take care, and we'll see you soon.